Get ready for Netflix's gripping new medical drama, Pulse. Set in a cutting-edge Miami trauma center, third-year resident Dr. Danny Sims is unexpectedly thrust into a promotion when beloved chief resident Dr. Xander Phillips gets suspended. Then, with the emotional and physical stakes at their highest, a storm will push the hospital and its residents to their limits. Witness how life can change in a heartbeat when you're operating under pressure. Watch Pulse, only on Netflix.
Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple.
Yeah, it's very simple in that it is simply not true. All right, the reality is that the numbers on his board are not the tariffs other countries are charging us. They actually represent the trade deficit between the U.S. and those countries, meaning we buy more stuff from them than they buy from us. I'm just going to repeat this. Those numbers don't represent the tariffs. They represent that we buy more stuff from them than they buy from us. That means we're basically punishing other countries for selling us stuff that we want. This is like me going to John Barbados and beating the shit out of him because I like his socks. Why don't you ever buy my socks, John Barbados? I don't make any socks, but that's no excuse. I'm not too concerned about Donald Trump not understanding how his tariffs work because he's Donald Trump. He doesn't understand how to make money running a casino. The important thing is that there are adults in the room, like Scott Besson. That guy's going to have the answers we need.
What do you expect the stock market to look like when it opens tomorrow in reaction to this?
I don't know.
Should we view these as permanent?
But, I think we're going to wait and see how this plays out.
Do you plan on having negotiations before that date?
I just don't know if there are going to be negotiations.
Canada and Mexico notably missing on that chart. Why is that?
I'm not sure.
It's not very reassuring to have the Treasury Secretary of the United States going,
Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School, the final pinch of salt to Thursday's marinade. I'm Alex.
And I'm Kenny, filling in for Naomi, who's off enjoying the delights of Liverpool this weekend. We've already seen several pics of the inside of the Cavern pub. Surprise, surprise. So, Naomi, if you're listening, it's 2 Baroccas and a fried egg sandwich for that hangover, girl.
Now, there was a bit of a smorgasbord of things to choose from today. I guess Russell Brand has been charged. Not much we can say on that, I guess.
There's not really. The laws of contempt apply to us as much as anybody else.
Absolutely. And I think contempt is pretty much a summary of our feelings on the man, so nothing needs to be said beyond that.
That's the shortest editorial in history. I applaud you.
There's also been a really bizarre, Reform UK having gone up and down the country telling everyone how amazing their vetting procedures are. They seem to have let someone through as a candidate who was tweeting pro-Jimmy, wait for it, was tweeting pro-Jimmy Savile stuff in 2022.
HR departments up and down the country have been checking social media feeds for people applying for jobs for well over a decade now. I've got a sneaky suspicion that Reform are checking people's social media feeds and are gravitating towards the most controversial ban pots that they can find because it guarantees them headlines. There's no way on God's great earth that anybody doing any sort of checks wouldn't have discovered somebody tweeting on behalf of Jimmy Bloomin' Savile.
Well, apparently he said he forgot to tell them about his ex account, which doesn't inspire much confidence in the vetting process. If basically the candidate forgetting to mention that he has an ex account is the end of the check. But anyway, before we get started, out comes the collections tray. As is traditional for Sunday services like this, we make all of our content available for free to everyone with no restrictions, and we rely on people's generosity and sense of civic duty to keep making it. So if you can afford it, please head over to ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod and become a monthly supporter for as little as £5.
And talking of supporters, thank you again to the huge number of you who've been tuning into Alex's other show, the utterly brilliant Podyssey, which revisits the classic Greek myths through a 21st century lens. Now, Podyssey is barely midway through the first series, but it's already such a hit that we're working on a longer second series. So if you're interested, and you should be, search for Alex Andreou's Podyssey wherever you get your pods. And a top tip, it's a particularly great weekend listen, okay?
We'll stick some links in the show notes. I mean, the last episode is particularly opposite, I would say, because it's all about King Midas. You could not have a better example of how have we ended up elevating men like that to gold penthouses. So the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, I should say, were very wise. The modern Greeks, not so much.
No comment at all. None.
Right. So what are we going to concentrate on, Kenny? We did promise to look at the fallout from Trump's Liberation Day after we have seen some reaction. And boy, have we seen some reaction. Rather than follow every other podcast that did breathless hot takes on the day, which basically all boiled down to, we don't know anything yet.
No, absolutely.
Why do we keep doing that? It just upsets and riles up and annoys people.
It's part of the media's habit of, look, there's a void, and media of any sort abhors a void. And if there isn't anything solid, worthwhile, and insightful to fill that void with, puts junk in there. I'm sure that we've both got a teensy bit to say about Trump's essentially his dismantling of post-war trade norms. But we're also going to be looking a wee bit closer to home, well, if you live in Scotland, that is, where it's been an interesting week for followers of the dramas of Holyrood.
I always love reporting from the nations. And then if we have time, we can update rioters on developments in South Korea, which has had a really interesting time in the last, I guess, 3-4 months.
Well, it's all going to keep us very busy, so let's get cracking. It's been a bad week if you do business with America, particularly if you're a car manufacturer or a penguin, as Donald Trump made good on his threat to hit the world with trade tariffs and how he has hit it. Now, we Brits have been on Trump's equivalent of Santa's good list, and we're one of the countries who will only face a 10% tariff on goods that we export to America. Europe got smacked for the 20% level, and those on the naughty list, such as China and, checks notes, Lesotho, were hit with rates of 50% and more. Now, it's definitely been one of the strangest episodes of geopolitical shenanigans that I can remember. At once, it's deadly serious as it's created stock markets globally, and yet utterly farcical, with random islands that lots of us had never heard of being targeted and no apparent meaningful economic foundations to the calculations Team Trump was using. Lots of people in this country, as well as America, have already seen the value of their savings tank as a direct result.
Global stock markets falling and the world's biggest economies vowing retaliation.
The president's tariffs will be a shock to the global trading system as we know it.
The market's having a very strong negative reaction.
Honestly, this is just a disaster of idiocy.
Carnage on Wall Street.
Markets falling, tumbling.
Stocks plunging.
Down, down, down. The Nasdaq's getting crushed. Small caps are getting crushed.
This is a shock to the system.
It is ugly out there. Worse than worst case scenario.
Stocks are getting slashed and burned.
I think it's going really well.
What details do we have about how the markets have reacted to Trump's moves, Alex?
I mean, nothing good is the short answer. Sharp drops in the Dow Jones, S&P 500, Nasdaq. They're all basically down from between 5.5% to 6% by the end of trading on Friday. And remember, this comes at the end of a period of drops because of the anticipated tariffs coming in. So all in all, we're in sort of 20% territory.
Which is recession territory, isn't it?
Yeah, it's bear market territory, basically. So it drops in all major stock markets worldwide because this is one of those, I want to say unusual things, but it's not that unusual. It's a lose-lose, basically. Everyone will get poorer. It's exactly like Brexit. We ended up losing more than the EU did, but the EU lost out as well. It was just a bad thing all around. And even the dollar went up a tiny bit, which, remember, is terrible news for Trump because he wants the dollar to drop. in order to show that he's making progress in equalizing the trade deficit. Because if the dollar drops, of course, then it means American imports look less valuable as opposed to American exports. And it makes it look like he's done something great. But actually, the dollar went slightly up because, I guess, of an expectation that there might be an interest rate cut, because he's basically set his own economy on fire, and also a sense that it's underpriced at the moment. It's the dollar. It might happen in 4 years, but it will eventually go up. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a shit show, frankly. There's not a single thing that's going well.
It's fascinating to look at the alleged science behind the tariffs themselves, because as that particular story unraveled, I mean, it was just one joke after another, wasn't it? Could you explain to us how this tariffs list was created in the first place?
Yes, I think someone basically asked ChatGPT to create an episode of Pointless. Lesotho is a classic Pointless answer. The list is weird anyway. We'll talk about that in a minute. But some of the places are not even countries. They're just territories. So imposing tariffs on Martinique, which is French. So there's different tariffs now on Martinique than on France. I mean, the whole thing is insane. But basically, there's a formula. And what it does is it converts the trade deficit the US has with each country into a percentage. That's all it does. It's basically a division. The top number is value of exports minus imports, and the denominator is imports. And then Trump, in his magnanimity, has halved that.
Yeah, essentially what they did was they said, look, if we buy more stuff from you than you buy for us, we're going to punish you. And we've got a formula that explains it, brackets, it doesn't. But it wasn't actually an economic move at all, primarily, was it? It was very much a political move, which is why that bizarre formula didn't really matter at the end of the day. I mean, does any of it make any sense whatsoever?
No, and I'll tell you what, there's something really funny. In the denominator, there are loads of Greek letters, basically, because they
it was made for you, this wasn't it?
They tried to make it appear like they were doing like complicated maths rather than gone, take that, divide it by that, and halve it, which, as I said, makes zero sense, because you end up with weird results like the Falkland Islands.
We're going to come to that in a minute.
With tariffs because they do a lot of fishing. So basically, they export much more to the US than they import. But putting tariffs of them is not going to make the Falkland Islands buy loads of American goods. That isn't how any of this works. They're rather constrained by the fact that there's only 4 people and a sheep there.
And some penguins, which we will come to.
They put loads of Greek letters in there to make it look legit. But there is a hilarious thing. So in the denominator, there is a multiplication that's supposed to represent elasticity. And it basically multiplies 0.25 by 4.
I can do that one.
Which is basically 1, which then multiplies with the value of imports. So it's just imports. There's just one number there. The rest of it makes no difference whatsoever.
None at all. And on the left-hand side of the equation, one of the first things that was spotted was by the New Yorker writer, James Surowiecki, who looked at the formula, and there's a delta on the left-hand side. And the delta in economics means you're looking at a changing value, the change in value. So the first sign you see already waves a big flag saying this isn't a formula that's supposed to calculate absolute tariff levels or absolute anything. It's a formula for calculating changes. The whole thing looks like it was drawn up by somebody who's doing an undergraduate economics degree and has spent too much time at a pub.
Yeah, essay crisis, isn't it?
Exactly that.
Like
I remember
the night
them
before,
well.
shit, we have nothing.
Put Greek letters in.
I mean, the delta actually might end up to be quite prophetic because, as I explained to you, the value of the dollar has gone slightly up. So if they were to recalculate those tariffs now, they would all have to go higher.
Don't.
Quiet, riot. When you think about super successful businesses that are selling through the roof like Heinz or Mattel, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But there's a secret. The business behind the business making selling simple for them and buying simple for their customers. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout as Heinz and Mattel. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/promo.
Riot. We're all laughing about it, but how's the Trump administration reacted?
Well, he did a 4-day week. He left early and went to Florida to play golf. That is the sort of attitude that results in 6 of your businesses having to file for bankruptcy, including casinos. I mean, if you can't make money out of casinos, fucking hell. But everyone else is basically trust in Trump. That seems to be the catchphrase. Trust in Trump. He knows what he's doing. His trade secretary, Lutnick, appeared on various shows. They kept asking him questions. He kept saying, I don't know. All he knew was that it's all basically terribly unfair on America. This is America, the world's richest, strongest country, as a victim. It's remarkable. Let's have a little listen.
Here now with more. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick is with us. All right, what are we missing here? People saying that, oh, this is terrible.
I mean, the European Union won't take chicken from America. They won't take lobsters from America. They hate our beef because our beef is beautiful and theirs is weak. It's unbelievable. We can't sell corn to India. We can't sell rice to Asia.
So there you have it. Europe apparently won't take their beef because their beef is strong and ours is weak.
It makes as much sense as any of the other arguments, doesn't it?
And Asia refuses to buy their rice just to spite them. And it's like, I think Asia worked out rice about 10,000 years ago. I mean, it's insane. You've done a little bit of a dive into sort of the weirdest places that have ended up with tariffs.
And it's only the shallowest of dives because there are so many. There were plenty of memes around the Heard and McDonald Islands. That was the first of the weird victims that happens. And the Heard and McDonald Islands, if you're a listener who hasn't stumbled on this story, they're Australian. They're an Australian territory deep in the Indian Ocean, and they were hit with 10% tariffs, despite the fact they're uninhabited. They're literally just penguins there. There's a disused fishery.
Why will they not buy American cars, Kenny?
Damn those penguins. That's exactly it with their sneaky Chinese electric cars. But the penguins of the Heard and McDonald Islands were not the only penguins that were hit with tariffs. As we mentioned, the penguins of the Falkland Islands got a kicking as well. And it was much, much worse for the Falkland Island penguins. They got hit with a 42% tariff. 42% for the penguins of the Falkland Islands. There was only 7 other countries on that list faced a higher levy than the 42% tariff that's going to be imposed on the Falklands from next Wednesday. As an aside, the Falklands exports only $27.5 million worth of stuff to America. And the vast majority of that is toothfish. Have you come across toothfish, Alex?
No.
No, neither did I. Toothfish. It's a fish with a tooth, obviously, but apparently it's sweet.
That's the one.
Do you know what? I wouldn't put my finger in its mouth. Let me put it like that. But it does apparently have sweet, flaky flesh, and it's high in omega-3 fatty acids. So it sounds like it's quite a healthy food as well.
I'm looking at them as we speak, and it looks a little bit between cod and a less ugly monkfish.
Less ugly monkfish. But it wasn't just the penguins. I mentioned at the top of the show Lesotho. Lesotho and Eswatini, they're both landlocked countries. They're surrounded by South Africa. Yeah, that's right, yeah. And by some measures, they're now the only African countries who now trade more with the United States than with China. China's hoovered up so much of the African continent. Now, Eswatini was rewarded with one of those 10% Trump tariffs. It was on the good list. Lesotho, which trades with the United States more than it does with China, for its hard work, it was hit with a 50% tariff. I had a quick look at what it is that Lesotho produces, and 35% of its exports are diamonds. More than a third of what it exports is diamonds. So forgive me for having a hot take, but my hot take on this is that rich Americans buy Lesotho's diamonds, then other rich Americans punish Lesotho for selling those diamonds to rich Americans by putting a huge tariff on the diamonds bought by rich Americans, so that rich Americans will now pay a lot more for those diamonds. Make it make sense.
It doesn't. None of it makes sense. As you know, I had a long conversation with Vicky Price. We did a special on the idea of tariffs and whether they could work and how they can work. And even under the most kind interpretation, even under the most unorthodox economic modeling, that might show that it could result in a stimulation of manufacturing within the US and a rebalancing on trade, et cetera, even on those terms, if you get it that catastrophically wrong at the start, by targeting the value of goods a country sends to you instead of their tariff barriers, which is what he was meant to do, then it will have not only poor effects, it will have perverse effects. We will see really strange things happening basically all over the world on trade. So there's none of it makes sense.
There's two other little points that are worth making on that. The first is that if you're the global economic powerhouse that America is, if you have the safe haven currency, which the dollar has been for decades, then by dint of the fact that you're such a wealthy country, you will consume and invest more than the rest of the world because you've got more money to spend. Pretty much inevitably, that means that a trade imbalance is the default position. If you want to look at it as being a bad thing, you're a victim of your own success. You need to buy things and invest in things, and you're going to have to look outside your own borders to do that.
Not to mention, just to add to that, that if you are a very rich country, as America is, you also end up buying commodities.
Yes.
As an investment. So you end up buying loads of gold, loads of diamonds, loads of uranium, loads of minerals, loads of all of that stuff. You end up buying loads of it, which will be high value. And again, there is nothing that will suddenly make Vietnam have the financial power to buy as much from America as America buys from Vietnam. All you're doing is you are punishing American consumers by basically adding to the price they pay, and then the hope is that Adidas or whatever will now relocate all of its factories into the United States in order to avoid those tariffs. But that is stuff that takes a decade to happen. And the market reaction we've seen right now, these tariffs won't survive 2 months, let alone a decade.
Exactly.
So,
and in the event that Adidas and Puma did relocate to America, a couple of things would happen. It would cost the money to build these factories, so that has to be paid for.
Yep.
And at the same time, there's only two ways the workforce works. Either America drops wages to the levels that we see in China and Southeast Asia to maintain competitiveness, or the price of Adidas, Nike skyrockets. That's it. You know, either wages plummet or prices go up. There was one other point that sort of leapt out at me, and it was a reminder that spreadsheets are utterly deadly in the hands of stupid people. There was another Australian territory that was hit with eye-watering tariffs that really leapt out. It's called Norfolk Island. It's 1,000 miles northeast of Sydney, and it's home to just a couple of thousand people. Now, Australia got hit with a 10% tariff. The Norfolk Islands were somewhat perplexingly hit with a 29% tariff. Now, a shout out to The Guardian, because they checked this out, and they found that Norfolk Island exports pretty much nothing to America. So what the hell gives? Well, according to American government data, Norfolk Island actually exported, get this, $655,000 worth of goods to the United States in 2023, mostly leather footwear. Except it didn't. The Guardian found some paperwork which suggests Norfolk Island has just been the victim of bad data entry. Journalists found what we call two bills of lading. They're records of cargo shipments. These shipments each contained about 3,700 black Timberland men's ankle boots. And they set sail from the Bahamas for Miami, December 2023. Now, the bills of lading list Norfolk Island as the country of origin, and the address of the shipper is given as Timberland, 200 Domain Drive, Stratham, Norfolk Island. Timberland's corporate office address is listed as 200 Domain Drive, Stratham, New Hampshire. So somebody's been inputting data and gone, Norfolk, England, Norfolk Island, North fucking idea. It's literally, they've shut this island's economy down because somebody mistyped a shipping document. It's utterly mad. It really is.
Also, it's, just a really simple point. Even if Norfolk Island did those exports, even if the Marshall Islands did those, even if, the Falklands, they will just redirect it all through the main territory that has lower tariffs. So if Norfolk Island were a secret manufacturer of timberland boots,
We've rumbled you, Norfolk Island.
They could just export them out of Australia at a 10% tariff to avoid being clobbered. So the whole thing is just laughable.
It is laughable. My favourite quote was the Guardian asked Timberland shoes for comment, because proper journalists do that. And a spokesperson for Timberland shoes, who is presumably just weeping quietly in a cupboard somewhere at their headquarters, said to the Guardian, "Oh, we're in a quiet period and have no comment." Put the phone down. Just make this go away.
Quiet riot. This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
Quiet riot. Europe and the UK have both been pulling the punches on the basis that there's very little to be gained by provoking Trump further. The bottom line is that sort of 2/5 of our trade is with Europe, heading up towards half of our trade, actually, and 1/5 of it is with the United States. So whatever Trump wants us to swallow as part of a deal in tariffs, and that could be chlorinated chicken, so he could be literally wanting us to swallow some very unpleasant stuff. Whatever he wants, there's a risk it drives us farther from Europe. It's a proxy for whether or not we're closer to Europe than we are to America. The one thing that we know that's a global truth about bullies is that if you don't deal with them, they'll come back and they'll steal your lunch money every single day. So there is a crunch coming up at some point. And from a British perspective, there is no guarantee that that 10% level is at a permanent stay of execution. It's not.
Sure. Counterpoint to that, if you are at the lowest available level, you work quietly behind the scenes to reset your relationship with the EU. You still keep going with whatever negotiation you have with the United States, having very clear lines internally about what you're willing to accept and what you're not willing to accept, which I'm sure are there. But there's no point sort of inviting an even higher tariff on you. You're just doing what needs to be done without declaring it loudly.
I think that's right. But nevertheless, there is that moment on the horizon where a tipping point will come one way or another.
Yeah, I agree. And as long as the UK knows which side its bread is buttered on, which there has been some indications recently that it doesn't, which is quite worrying, then everything is fine. There's no point precipitating that bridge-burning moment. I just hope they know what they're doing. Now, it's also worth saying that the 20% tariff on the EU is significantly lower than most had expected. So there was actually quite a bit of relief in Brussels. I think that also does hint at a mindset that sort of knows a little bit which partners maybe they can get away with and which they can't. And one of the partners with whom they can't get away with it and knew they can't get away with it was China, who has responded in kind.
Does that change the calculation?
I mean, markets seem to think so, in that there was an initial tumble on the day, and then there was another tumble. Basically, we went from act of insane economic vandalism to trade war because someone has responded in kind. And we await to see what the White House does in response. China has obviously made the calculation that it can absorb this, it can take this, and it's not going to put up with it. Also very interesting and slightly underreported is a reaction from California.
Yes.
Gavin Newsom has come out and said that he will seek to strike trade deals direct with various countries most affected, notably a lot of the trade that comes into the States through California is from China and Mexico, almost 40% of it. How he's going to do that, I don't know. Like how he will get around a federal tax by introducing state legislation, I don't know. I think this hints at a really serious fraying of the federal fabric of the United
It's a bugger's
States.
model, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, which may actually have been the point of this whole Project 2025 thing in the first place. A lot of what's going on, the dismantling of the Department of Education and saying to states, you do whatever you want and pay for it. A lot of it hints in that direction. But at the same time, they don't seem to want to acknowledge the fact that all of their money comes from federal taxes forwarded by individual states. So I don't know when it comes to the point where a state goes, fine, we won't send you taxes anymore. If we have to pay for all this stuff ourselves, we're keeping the taxes we collect from citizens. It's horrible. Trump seems to be in a panic, I think. I don't know. How did you read his posts?
Well, I mean, I read them through my fingers, basically. It's like he's as unhinged as he's ever sounded, really. I mean, it's worth reminding ourselves that Trump, despite his historically high support levels in the early part of his presidency, has been bleeding support even before these announcements were made. There were a couple of polls out in the last week that were obviously done before he announced these tariffs. Mm-hmm. Reuters had Trump approval at 42% positive. It was 45% positive just a couple of weeks prior to that. A Harris poll had slightly different figures, but it also showed a 3% drop in positive sentiment towards
Trump. And those are both A-rated polls.
They absolutely, these are the real deal. It's hard to see a situation where the chaos that's unfolding now has anything other than a further negative impact on his rating figures. And we know that he's a simple man at heart, and simple figures such as ratings do cut home to him. Do we think that he's going to find a way to U-turn?
I don't know. Everything that's coming from him right now smells of panic. Like, you don't want the surgeon coming out after surgery covered in blood going, the patient definitely is doing really well. Clean up on aisle 4. All of this stuff. It's like, China played it wrong. They panicked. That was an all caps tweet. He actually shared a post with a TikTok video by some nut, which claims, and I quote, Trump is playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. Trump is purposely crashing the market. This is apparently to push cash into treasuries, which forces the Fed to slash interest rates in May. And those lower rates give the Fed the ability to refinance trillions of debt very inexpensively. Yeah. And it weakens the dollar and drops mortgage rate. I don't know why she swallowed a fly. Perhaps she'll die. Let's say that's the case. This was followed by Trump going, again in all caps, cut interest rates, Jerome, and stop playing politics, to Jerome Powell, who is the chair of the Fed.
Who was appointed by Trump.
Yeah. And it's like, if you're playing 4D chess, you don't tend to announce what you need the other person to do for your next move to work, right? And then the funniest one of all, which he since deleted, is it's already working, Hank tough.
Hank tough.
And so now the meme is everywhere in the US is, who is Hank tough?
I mean, Jerome Powell, there's a serious side to this, because Jerome Powell is now a man who's very much at war with Trump, and you have to fear for his position in many ways, even though he's supposed to be independent as the chair of the Federal Reserve. I mean, yesterday he was talking to journalists, and he said, and I quote, "Our obligation is to keep longer-term inflation expectations well anchored and to make certain that a one-time increase in the price level doesn't become an ongoing inflation problem." In other words, back in your box, Trump, with your tariffs and your plans for interest changes.
That's the bottom line. And that, I think, is, if there is one takeaway point, that's the takeaway point. This kind of market shock is basically tantamount to what happened around the pandemic. Only this one is man-made. This one is self-inflicted. So after the pandemic, the market globally did not recover to where they had been. They recovered to a much lower equilibrium.
And that's also true of the 2008 crash. This is what happens, permanent damage.
Yeah. This chunk was lost permanently, and it took economies years to get to where they would have been roughly if the pandemic had never happened. And this is what will happen again now. Some of these losses will be recovered, either when he U-turns or when stock becomes so trash that it is seen as a good investment again, people start buying. But it won't be recovered fully. Economies globally will settle on a lower equilibrium. Growth, which has been anemic anyway, will be affected, and it will take us a decade to get back to where we would have been had this nut not been doing what he's doing.
Absolutely. I suppose just as we bring this topic to a close, there's one other happening over the pond that is worth highlighting. Elon Musk appears to be on the way out, and Laura Loomer, they found somebody who was even more nuts than Musk. She's in. What on earth is going on there? Have you got any idea?
Well, look, Laura Loomer is this conspiracy theorist, basically. She thinks 9/11 was an inside job. She believes in the deep state, the lot. By the way, if the deep state does exist, now would be a good time for it to kick into action. But I digress. So proper conspiracy nut, but she's also sort of emblematic of the grassroots MAGA movement. You know, she's a social media influencer. She's been with Trump straight from the word go, never wavered. She's hardcore, and she's seen as, she's almost like the fans' representative at a football club, where Musk is the head of the board, if that makes sense.
It does. It kind of suggests that they're reaching what we would describe as the bottom of the barrel when it comes to the real hardcore MAGA.
And she had a big falling out with Musk, accusing him of taking over the MAGA movement and weaponizing it as a tool for the super rich, as opposed to what it was meant to be, which was power to the people. It's no coincidence that as Musk seems to be out, she seems to be in. She had a meeting with Trump in the White House, after which a significant portion of his intelligence committee was sacked after representations that she's made about them. So it's a little bit hard to fathom this, to make it compute, but the next step might be to head in a loonier direction.
Oh, break out the popcorn. Just don't buy it from America.
Anyone can follow. It takes something special to be an original, which is why the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV arrives with new ways of surrounding you in luxury, including the ultra-wide 48-inch panoramic display and the multi-sensory Lincoln Rejuvenate experience. A true original never stops evolving. So meet the 2025 Navigator, the original that's all new and better than ever. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Lincoln and Navigator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
Now, up in Scotland, Jamie Green MSP, former Shadow Education Secretary, Shadow Justice Secretary, quit the Scottish Tories with immediate effect on Thursday morning over what he claimed was a sharp move of the party to the far right. 48 hours later, just under actually, the Scottish Liberal Democrats, during their annual conference in Inverness, unveiled Green as their latest MSP. Let's have a little listen.
I have to say, I'm not sure who's more surprised to see me here, you or me, to be quite honest with you. Can I thank you for that really kind opening remark? I am really happy to be here. As you probably spotted, the last few days have been tumultuous, to say the least, in my life. In the last 48 hours, I've gone from being politically homeless, like many Scots right now, to joining you here today in my new home.
Scottish Conservative leader Russell Findlay described losing him as unfortunate and added, colleagues that choose to leave do so for all sorts of reasons, some of them fairly selfish to them. I believe that the people of Scotland and our members see what we're doing, see what I'm doing as the new leader, and have confidence in that. Okay, so Jamie Green is not a nobody in Scottish politics, right, Kenny? No. He was a frontbencher until very recently.
Jamie Green has been an MSP since back in 2016, and he's held various positions, including Shadow Justice Secretary. So he was climbing the greasy pole quite effectively. He did have brief ambitions of leadership, and he was one of 6 Conservative MSPs who ran for the party's leadership last summer. Now, Green was sacked from the front benches in 2023 because he supported Scotland's gender recognition reforms. These are proposals that the Liberal Democrats actively backed. And if you talk to people in Scotland from various parties, actually, and if you put aside the rancour around the gender recognition debate, Green has been seen as one of those sorts of politicians who isn't necessarily big on rhetoric, but does stick to his principles. And the Scottish Conservatives must have been a fairly difficult home to him for some time now.
And socially liberal, presumably so.
On that wing, I mean, once upon a time, you'd have described him as being on the wet side of the party. That the party doesn't have a wet side now.
Yeah, no, it's now dry and desiccated.
You could stick it in the top of a bottle of wine. It's so dry, couldn't you? I mean, it's been a busy week in Scottish politics. I think it's worth mentioning, since we're on the topic, that the Green co-leader, the Scottish Greens co-leader, Patrick Harvey, has decided to stand down. And disgruntled activists have said that's a long time coming. So the Scottish Greens have got some internal challenges that they're going to have to face up to. And then amongst the Tories, Ruth Davidson, at one time touted as a potential National Conservative leader, she came out and said that Badenoch's leadership is rocky and suggested that she might not lead the party into the 2029 general election. So
yeah, I mean, yeah, welcome, Ruth.
Yeah, exactly. You don't say, gal.
I mean, it's significant that she's saying it, I guess, because she wouldn't say that lightly. What reasons did he himself give for leaving the party and going over to the Lib Dems?
I think they were quite predictable, given what we know about his history. He said that the Scottish Tory party had become, and I quote, Trump-esque in both style and substance, close quotes. In other words, they were chasing those right-wing voters. It's a complaint that we've long heard from more moderate Conservatives up and down the country. And then he turned up at the Liberal Democrat conference in Inverness yesterday, and he gave a speech where he said he wanted to reach out to compassionate centre-right Tories who also felt scunnered with the endless culture wars and fringe issues that my former party has become obsessed with. So again, it's a familiar cry from old school Conservatives. Politically, they don't have a home to go to.
What's your instinct? Is this genuinely what's going on, or is there other stuff rumbling under the surface? Dissatisfaction with, I don't know, not getting a position that maybe he felt he deserved, or the winner of that leadership election not reaching out to him? Or is it genuinely that it's been a long time coming that he's being dissatisfied with the direction the party is taking?
I think he set his stall out when he was sacked. He showed that he was prepared to stand up for what he believed in, even if that was controversial. Now, it's politics, so there's inevitably, you always assume that there must be some personal interest there. But if we zoom out from his defection, the Scottish Tories have also been hit by councillors defecting, but the councillors have been defecting to reform. And therein lies the conundrum which faces the party everywhere. As it chases those Farage votes, it loses what moderates it still has, but it also bleeds support from its own flanks, from its own right flanks, to reform as well.
It's a pincer. It's a really dangerous pincer movement.
It is.
For them. I mean, the last time I saw this, almost like a mirror image of it on the left, was what happened to PASOK in Greece,
right,
where they tried to play a little bit to ethnocentrist, nationalist sort of sentiment in order to try and get some votes from the Conservatives in Greece, at the same time as Syriza was sort of rising up in Greek politics, and they were losing votes to the left. And they ended up within 2 electoral cycles from 40% of the vote to 4%.
Yeah, it was an absolute cliff edge, wasn't it?
It's called PASOKification in international politics now. Can I ask you something? The very first reaction of the Conservative Party was a Scottish Conservative spokesperson put out a statement that said, "Our party will continue to respect the results of referendums and oppose the SNP's dangerous gender ideology."
Yeah.
Which seems to me utterly bizarre. Like, here is someone who is leaving your party for the Liberal Democrats. The other big challenge you're facing is to the right. You're losing votes to reform. And your first reaction is to come out and attack the SNP. I mean, this is a gift to Scott Nats, isn't it? Because they will turn around the SNP quite rightly, I think, and present a picture of squabbling Westminster parties, because this is national worries that the Conservative Party has, basically allowing that dysfunction to spread into Scotland.
I mean, it's a valid point you make. I think there were 2 things I'd say about that. Firstly, that statement that you highlighted is classic dog whistle politics. Shine the spotlight back on gender recognition issues and tried to shine it away from the problems that the Scottish Conservatives had. At the same time, the new leader, relatively new leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Russell Finlay, he's not naive when it comes to media. Russell Finlay was a crime reporter for The Sun and the Sunday Mail in Scotland. He's well versed and he knows as well as anybody what happens in the darkest corners of the country, and he knows how media operates. Somebody tried to kill him on his own doorstep. He's got a fascinating life story.
Bloody hell.
Is
there a biography out?
He'd make a fantastic guest to talk about his politics and how and why he got into his politics. His knowledge of the media should be a huge plus. He's far from being the first former journalist to get involved with politics.
This is always my, I guess, suspicion of national parties that want to have a sort of Scottish branch that is semi-independent. If his main motivation is being anti-Scottish independence, then that should be reflected in national policies, right? That is their sort of philosophical pitch, that the UK is better as one entity. So when they come out and focus on independence and the referendum and the SNP as if this is their only unique selling point, that to me sits a little bit awkwardly. You should be talking about education and health. And do you know what I mean?
I do. I mean, part of this is the problem that we have, of course, spending a lot of our time outside Scotland. You know, if you read the Scottish press regularly, as I do, because my house is still in Scotland, obviously the parties up there do debate long and hard on all the same issues that are important south of the border as well. It does happen. The headlines that tend to leach out will be easy to understand headlines, which are around topics such as the gender recognition debate and the ongoing independence debate.
I accept that. I wasn't suggesting there's no debate happening in Scotland about education. I'm just saying that if your first response from the party spokesperson to someone defecting to the Liberal Democrats because they say the party nationally is becoming very right-wing is to point to the referendum and badmouth the SNP, that seems to me a strange reaction to someone expressing a concern about the national direction of the party.
I think he was also expressing concern about the directions of the party within Scotland. That's the lens that Scottish politics operates through. It comes back to what we've been saying throughout this section is, of course, that the Conservatives in Scotland, and let's remember, Conservatives are the second biggest party in Holyrood. It's not the case that they're a tiny rump and that nobody in Scotland votes Conservative. They face the same problems and the same challenges that Conservatives elsewhere in the country do. It's as much of an existential threat to the party up north as it is down south, as it is anywhere else. I don't think it's any different at all in that respect.
Well, we'll be looking at the polling coming out of Scotland in the next couple of months with great interest. There are, of course, no local elections, I think, in Scotland this spring, but the Scottish parliamentary elections for Holyrood are just around the corner. You know, they're May 2026, just over a year from now. So it's not a long way to go.
There's more popcorn to be enjoyed there as well.
Quiet riot.
Now, another country that's been having a pretty interesting time recently is South Korea. Let me remind you what happened back in December. Pretty insane episode to begin with. So on 3rd of December 2024, in a deadlock over a budget bill and dogged by corruption scandals and various indictments against members of his cabinet, the then President Yoon made an unprecedented televised announcement. It really came out of nowhere. I cannot emphasize this enough, that he was invoking martial law to protect the country from anti-state forces that sympathized with North Korea. Less than 2 hours later, almost 200 of a total of 300 assembly members, including some from Yoon's party, gathered and voted to overturn that decision. Yoon was impeached by Parliament and suspended from his duties on the 14th of December. I won't bore you with details, but there have been impeachments since. So the replacement was also impeached because they weren't going after the first impeachment hard enough and replaced. And then that replacement went and the first one came back having been suitably chastised, I guess. Yoon is facing charges for insurrection. There were extraordinary scenes in the first week of January when he basically locked himself in the palace and refused to let investigators serve him with a warrant and be arrested and take away evidence. He is South Korea's first sitting president to be arrested and charged with a crime, and he's now on bail. So catch us up, Kenny. What's the latest episode of that saga?
The story itself is absolutely fascinating from the beginning of this year to where we are now, because when when this all kicked off, by and large, South Koreans were pretty united in discomfort or even disgust about what the president had tried to do. But what makes this particular episode even more interesting is the fact that Yoon at no point showed anything even vaguely resembling remorse. He fought his trial every time he could, and he kept dangling unsubstantiated conspiracy theories that he used to justify his military takeover. And he went deep down a rabbit hole on this one. He said that the country and that the political opposition had been infiltrated by North Korean and Chinese spies, and that these anti-state forces had rigged past elections. Now, in the last sort of couple of months, more and more people have started to believe him. And to those people, he's now viewed as being somewhat of a political martyr, the victim of an establishment that's been overrun by pinkos and communists.
Mm-hmm.
And the conspiracy theories, it's a very 21st century story, this. His conspiracy theories have really taken root quite firmly. And far-right extremism is flourishing. Does that sound at all familiar? There are currently thousands of people protesting every week in Seoul. They're probably there again as we record today. And they think that the country's politicians and judges both are corrupt and that the elections are rigged. I have to emphasize that these are not what we would call fringe views. The polling and the research that's been done there suggests that more than a third of people don't now trust the Constitutional Court, which delivered the verdict on Yoon. And more than a quarter don't even trust the voting system. There's a bit of a crisis. On top of all that, now, the way the system works, they've only got a couple of months to choose another leader. So this is now going to be a very focused, incredibly intense period where a new leader is chosen.
Yeah, they have to have an election by, when is it?
60 days from
the 2nd of June. Yeah. I think I saw somewhere. Yeah,
and like we saw in America, the way these things tend to pan out is that a whole bunch of people are quite likely not to accept whatever the result is.
I mean, it has to be said that confidence in Yoon has collapsed much more than confidence in the PPP, the People's Power Party, although they have taken a hit. The DPK, I think, is the Democratic Party of Korea, which is the sort of left of center equivalent. And that, I guess, is important to say that Yoon, he enjoys significant fringe support, but by no means anything approaching a majority.
No, but it's enough to make it very, very interesting. It's keeping interest in politics right at the front, as strong personalities always do. I think there's something that's worth noting. South Korea has got a fairly substantial list of leaders who have been impeached, arrested, got into trouble one way or another. And I've seen a lot of people asking, the question, is this because South Korea is in some way more corrupt, that the political environment there encourages or fails to punish corruption? And I think there's a case to be made that South Korea, it is actually what can happen if you take political corruption seriously, because one thing we can say is that they do put their leaders on trial. Yoon could face the death penalty for what he did. He could face life in prison. In reality, what will probably happen is they'll slap a sentence of a few years on him, but they take these things seriously in a way that we in the West probably don't.
And I think it's also a function of being so close and in a permanent state of tension with North Korea, which has the complete reverse of a system of government.
Yeah.
It probably puts sort of extra pressure on South Koreans to be super democratic, which can actually result in, again, weird bulges and perverse incentives.
And also, let's not be naive about it, that Yoon's conspiracy theories about China and North Korea interfering with South Korean politics, you'd be surprised if China and North Korea weren't. And certainly, having seen the kerfuffle that's going on at the moment, they would be mad if they weren't wading in.
It's a really fascinating example. And I think we will try to find an expert in that region to do a special episode with. And the reason I say this is because we have two such clear paradigms of this kind of thing going on for completely different reasons.
Yes, that's right.
So you could really compare it to what happened in Ukraine, with Russia interfering and fomenting this idea that the legitimately elected government was actually Nazis and that they were going to punish the minorities in the country, and really riling up political instability in order to get an advantage, But you could also compare it to January 6th and Trump refusing to accept the result of that election and those conspiracy theories, which were entirely self-interested and originated from within that party. And it's really difficult to distinguish which it is, right?
That's right. I think what you've stumbled onto there, Alex, is the topic for your PhD. Good luck with that one.
Okay, well, listen, that is all from us today. This is just to allay Naomi's fears, who you always badmouth for doing long episodes. You've now done 2 specials of your own, both of which were very long. and
if you will keep me locked under the stairs, I have to talk when I get out.
And the Monster Sunday School. So the truth is, we like to go on. And that is all from us today. We will now let you go outside, if you're not already there, and enjoy the sunshine free from all tariffs.
Yeah, I do enjoy that sunshine. And do also please consider supporting our little project on coffee.com/QuietRiotPod. You can do that for the price of a fancy Frappuccino, and you'll get hours of pleasure and 0 calories.
I will be back with Naomi on Tuesday with a very special bonus episode, which I promise you will double up as group therapy and an antidote to the current madness.
Woohoo! Well, until then, do take our gratitude for lending us your ears once more, fold it up, put it in your back pocket, and try not to sit on it. Oh, and do keep rioting quietly.
We love you mucho. Bye!
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangita. Artwork by Simone Canello. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot.